Hi guys, Tracy here from the Academy. So I just got my hands on this year's Geography higher level paper, so we're going to have a quick glance through it. So starting off with the short questions, part number 1, probably what most students like about the paper, the short questions, where we had to answer 10 out of 12 short questions. Now this year's short questions were quite standard, the typical short questions. This section examines obviously your skills section, your physical geography and your regional. So really there was no curveballs here. There was 2 questions based on your Ordnance Survey map, 2 on your aerial photograph, 1 really based on regional, a little bit on the EU there as well, actually on top of that, and then the rest were physical. There was no major curveballs thrown in here by the examiner. The only thing I would say is hotspots have never really been focused on for a short question before, so that was something a little bit different here than we've seen in previous years, but nothing major in this section. Now what students probably have been more concerned about in recent times is part 2 of the paper, which is the structured and essay style questions. Now this year was a little bit different because students didn't have to answer 4 questions, they only had to answer 3. They could answer 3 from 3 different sections or 2 from 1 and a third from a second section. Now, the majority of students are going to be looking at physical, regional and geoecology, so that's what I'm going to focus on here today. So starting off with our physical geography, question 1, 2 and 3, as per usual in question 1 we've seen a sketch of an Ordnance Survey map. That was followed by our feature of deposition. Most students would be choosing to do either a delta or a floodplain, so a really nice question and one that was very likely for this year's paper because a waterfall was, a feature of erosion was asked last year, so it was kind of just turning round this year. Now with that as the part C, we also seen a little bit on seismic activity, a nice simple question, something very similar to what you would have studied at junior cert, predicting and reducing the effects of earthquakes. A nice straightforward question, but you would have to be really careful there to make sure you had that almost even split of 7 and 8 SRPs when looking at the predicting and reducing the effects. Now, in relation to question 2, also your physical geography question, you had a part A, a coastal landform section. Now, this wasn't overly challenging in comparison to other years and the questions the examiners have asked for part A's. We did only see 4 parts to this question, which is a little bit simpler than kind of the recent trend where examiners have asked 6 and 7 parts, which you'll see in question number 3. So a nice straightforward C question there. Along with that, we've seen part B, another very, I suppose, a highly likely topic for this year, which was distinct landscapes, how rock types produce distinct landscapes. Now here again, that almost even split was required, and most students would be answering this question with karst landscapes and also with your basalt plateau, 2 things that almost every single year come up on the paper. The part C there was also focused on rivers or the fluvial environment, and this was human interaction with the fluvial environment. Now, most students do the fluvial environment, but some students may have chosen to do the coastal environment here or mass movement, but fluvial environment and typically speaking dam construction there would be the most likely of topics. Now that was a lovely question for any students obviously doing a physical geography question. Probably the most predictable on the paper, and if you had studied obviously rocks and rivers there, you would have got the 2 essay style questions. The question 3, a nice simple volcanic activity part A. Now there was 7 parts to this question, but this year obviously with the additional time, not the additional time in the exam paper, but the kind of less questions, so additional time in that sense, it was a lot easier for students to actually approach these 7 parts. It was a little written text passage or a little comprehension piece, and students answered most of the questions from that piece and the diagram itself. So for a lot of students that would have been very enticing there. The part B was a fluvial environment question as well, but this was focused on base level change, so your rejuvenation isostasy topics here. Now that's a higher level topic only, and something many students who find obviously geography very content heavy may have avoided or steered away from studying, but here that question would have been easy for anybody who had really studied the topic because there isn't many essays the examiner can actually ask there. The part C, beautiful question, igneous rocks, asked to examine 2 igneous rocks, so looking there at granite and basalt, again remembering that almost even split. Now that's the physical geography question. Personally speaking, every single one of them questions were really lovely questions to get. The physical geography section was very nice this year. Now onto our second section of the paper, section number 2, that's your regional geography section. Some students love this section, other students steer away from it because it is quite fact and figure heavy, figures in particular. Now, one thing I'm going to say for any students who answered this section of the paper, maybe did one question or two, what you would have noticed is it focused dramatically this year on your continental, subcontinental region. Most students study in either Brazil or India. Every single question 4, 5 and 6 had a part concentrating on your continental, subcontinental. So for maybe if you avoided that in your studies, you might have avoided the regional geography section altogether. Now, starting off with question number 4, your part A, your 20-mark part. Your part A this year was a little bit of a surprise. We expected this year the part A to be a sketch map of either Ireland or secondly, your European regions, one of them either the Mesogeion or the Paris Basin. The examiner threw a little curveball in here and they asked you for a sketch map of your subcontinental. Now, while India and Brazil are 2 easy sketch maps, obviously if students maybe weren't prepared for that, that may have thrown them ever so slightly, but still plenty of options here. Along with that question, we've seen again a highly likely one for this year, secondary economic activity in an Irish region. So most students looking at the GDA, obviously of this side of the country, or maybe other students looking at the Western region. And here what you had to make sure you focused on was, they said 2 factors. So 2 factors that had influenced the development. Really, really important that you focused on 2 factors. Maybe it was raw materials and transportation, and that you had that almost even split. Remember, you're going to get 2 marks for naming each of those factors. So there's a couple of nice little easy or quick marks to gather there. Along with that, 4C was actually a European Union question. So here was the challenges. So the social and economic challenges that they faced. Now, again, this is something that a lot of students avoid, particularly if they do not like kind of looking at the EU. Economics students will tend to focus on this and actually go into this in detail, but a lot of students actually leave this section out, similar to isostasy with physical geography. So that may have been one that students said, no, I'm not doing the EU, so that's not the question for me. Question number 5. Again, the usual table kind of skill section to start off with, a little bit on the EU and fishing. Again, a lot of these were kind of common sense questions that students would know, or obviously the important thing there was to have brought your calculator into the exam and calculated the figures here. The part B and the part C were very nice with this. You had tertiary economic activity in your continental, subcontinental. Now again, the examiner wanted 2 factors. Maybe your attractions and your accessibility would be 2 perfect ones, linking up transportation. And again, you would have been looking at Brazil or India. That one was pinned for this year either with your subcontinental or with your European region. We were expecting tertiary economic activity. The last part here was your urban development in Europe. So you'd be looking at Paris or potentially Naples, whichever you prefer. And again, they were looking at development. So they want you to discuss the factors, again, that influenced its development. You could have focused on population, location, transportation, natural resources. All of these are factors or influences that have influenced the development. Lovely question there. Question 5, I think, may have been the nicer of the regional geography questions. Finally, question number 6, your last question here. Part A, again, nice little map or table as such. A lot of the questions here were reading off the table for question 6A, your 20 marker. There was 7 parts which a lot of people kind of look at and go, oh, I don't know, will I get that done? But you had that again, a little bit of additional time, so that would have been a nice one. Part B, 6B, was again one that was very likely for this year, and that was accounting for the development of agriculture in your European region under factors. So either climate, you had relief, you had market. Generally speaking, students are going to select climate and relief as the 2 factors and focus on them. And with that, they may have drawn their sketch map to get that additional 2 marks. The part C here, not as likely for this year, but still a lovely question because of the options. You had to look at 2 factors that influence the development of your subcontinental or continental region, things like language, religion, so the cultural aspects, but also rural development or population dynamics. You had the choice there, you had a massive choice, and you only had to choose 2 out of the 5 that was given. Now, most students would have selected their 3 out of either physical and regional. Or the last one, which was very popular students doing this year, was their geoecology section. Now, other students may be looking at culture and identity. That seems to be kind of a trend or a pattern. People seem to be looking at that quite a little bit more. But geoecology, we were very, very lucky this year. And the reason for that was a lot of students were looking at biomes solely. And if you were looking at biomes, you probably were focusing on the human interaction or human interference with biomes, things like the felling of tropical rainforest, like the Amazon rainforest, or intensive agricultural practices and industrial development, which is exactly what came up this year as your 80-mark question. Question number 18, 80 marks you had there. It was exactly as we had expected. Now, for students who may not have looked at biomes here, you may have looked at soils. You had a lovely one looking at soil development, where you looked at the mineral matter, the air, the water content, and obviously your organic matter. That was a lovely question as well for anybody looking at soils. Quite a reoccurring question. Probably it's kind of the basic soil question as such. So guys, that is this year's 2021 paper. I hope everybody got on very well in this paper. It definitely was a nice paper, particularly the physical geography section and also your geoecology. Regional geography a little bit trickier, obviously with the main focus being on your continental, subcontinental, but overall very, very pleased with this year's paper.